everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of the books I read before this year in 2020 before I started my YouTube channel in April. So I'm finally filming this like months later, months later since part 1. So the flow will be a little bit different. And my ability to remember exactly all the details from these books won't be super fresh, but I still want to mention them because I did read some good books in that time. So let's just jump right into it with the first book I read since part 1, and that is Melmoth the Wanderer by Charles Maturin. So this is a book I had stumbled upon on accident. I knew nothing about this, but it was on sale at the end of the year book sale at my bookstore. And so, I mean, it was only, what, $5? And it said, at the end, it said, Melmoth the Wanderer blends gothic fiction and psychological realism to create a work of hallucinatory power. And that sounded good to me. I mean, I've discovered that I do very much enjoy gothic fiction. I mean, I read The Monk last year, I think, by Matthew Lewis, and that was just amazing. So good. Just like the topics they get into gothic fiction is just fantastic, and I love the sort of exaggerated feel of everything. So yes, I picked this up, and it's 700 pages or so, but I love this. So this is a book about, so basically everyone's name is Melmoth in this world, because it's sort of like in this book, because it's a name that was passed down over the generations within this family. But basically Melmoth is called over to his, I don't remember, either uncle or grandfather's, I think it might have been uncle's house, who was dying, and within his last words he says, you must destroy the painting, don't let him manipulate you, don't fall in his trap. And Melmoth is like, well, who is he talking about? What is going on? And his uncle is like, no, that figure at the door, don't let him in, don't let him in, but there's no one there. So it's just kind of like, what's going on? And the uncle dies. And when Melmoth goes to see what he's talking about, he goes to this painting, and it's this painting, this man, and he's like, wait a second, I just saw that person. So he had seen this figure, but the painting was from like 400 years earlier. So it's like, well, that's impossible. How could this person be alive now? And along with the painting, there's a scroll with sort of a diary in it, and he reads through it, and it's sort of, it has all these excerpts from the past, few hundred years about this Melmoth character. And basically what this book is, this book is about that Melmoth, Melmoth the Wanderer. You discover the not invincible, eternal, what's the immortal, there we go. I was like, Highlander the Immortal, there we go, the Immortal. So Melmoth the Immortal is this Melmoth the Wanderer. And so basically Melmoth the Immortal is this man who sort of had made this deal, questionably with the devil. That's never exactly stated explicitly in the book, but it's questionable. It's like, who did he make this deal with? And so he made this deal that he would gain immortal life, but he had to and to sort of break that contract, he has to manipulate somebody else into making the same deal. And so this book follows this Melmoth's journey throughout his life, and it becomes actually a story within a story within a story. So it's very much like Russian dolls. What are those called? But it's where like you have a main story, and then a character from that main story meets another character who has his own story, who has met another character who has their own story. And it's all, so as a book, it goes from this very high, big scale of, the original Melmoth who went to go to this estate, to Melmoth the Immortal. So it goes kind of back in time to his origins. And then eventually it's going to expand back out. So it's a lot to keep track of, especially with there's so many pages. But I thought it was so absolutely fascinating. I love every version of Melmoth the Wanderer that comes into this. The tension, the exaggeration, the exaggerated like emotions of people. That's what I love about Gothic fiction, is that everything is so exaggerated. It's like, oh, the devil, and how could he speak with such, you know, horrible, finish, way, and oh my gosh, I love that. I think it's fascinating. I think it makes it so much fun and so much more thrilling. And it's excellent. It could maybe bog down in certain areas. I think my favorite part was the character that was forced to become a monk in a monastery, and that was a fascinating, like, what, 200 pages of just this character who is like struggling because he's been forced to sort of accept this person with God. And he has no interest in that. He absolutely doesn't care. And the monastery basically kidnaps him and refuses to let him leave unless he accepts God. And so this becomes this tense, this tense conflict between this sort of makeshift monk and the leader of the monastery. And oh my gosh, that was intense. That was super, super thrilling. So it's a very good book. It's not gonna be for everyone, but I loved it. I mean, this kind of thing excites me. It was so easy to read, and yeah, that was good. After that, I wanted to stay in the classic realm, and so I read D.H. Lawrence's the very famous Lady Chatterley's Lover. And once again, this is not going to be for everyone, but I loved it. So this is a book about Constance Chatterley, who is married so I'm going to read this because I don't remember the character's name, who's married to an invalid, Sir Clifford, and so they have a very sexless marriage. And so Clifford suggests that because he can't fulfill this sexual role for her, he suggests that she picks up a lover. But he kind of like gives an inclination to take up a lover of good social standing. But instead, she falls for the gardener of the estate, who, just lives in a cottage in the back of the estate and doesn't really have any personal wealth or personal prosperity. And this particular relationship would definitely be very insulting to Sir Clifford, because it's like, well, yeah, I can't provide for you, but that doesn't mean you have to go scrumming, basically. But yeah, she falls for this gardener, and I think a lot of criticism can be made about this book about, well, it's not a relationship based off of love. It's just lust. It's just sexual desire, which nothing to sort of really back it up. But that's the thing about it, is that those relationships do exist. Just because your relationship is based off of love and things like that doesn't mean some people don't get it on via these sort of sexual relationships, or that they can't find love within a pure sexual relationship. So I think that's definitely some criticism that's made about this book. But I mean, screw you then, personally. I mean, why does your relationship have to be like the basis for everybody else's relationship? Like, your relationship is yours, let other people do them. And the fact that this woman thinks that she has a relationship and with this gardener, and even though it might be mostly sexual desire, it's authentic, it's real. And I think D.H. Lawrence, I think he's very, very good at describing relationships between man and woman. It might not be all appropriate. It might sort of insult your perspective on the relationship between man and woman, and you might find some of it like, oh, I can't, of course he would think that, he's a man. But the thing is that these things do exist, these thoughts do exist, they do happen, and they're just as authentic as yours. So this was very, very good. The sex scenes are excellently written, and they're real, they're authentic. They're not, flowers and love and hearts and things like that. They're real, and they're a little messy, and they're not, rabbits and bunnies, which are the same thing, but that's okay. Rabbits and bunnies. So I really enjoyed reading this. This was very, very good, and I liked its perspective on a very adult relationship. So I really love that. One more classic, staying in that same time period, was The Spire by William Golding. So I really enjoyed William Golding in school when we read Lord of the Flies. But I never read him anything again. And so recently, and I just mentioned this in my August Reads video, I've sort of been going back to these authors where I loved their book at one time, but I just never followed up on them. And so I read The Spire, which was once again very gothic, and I love this as well. It's this is much more difficult to read than Lord of the Flies. That what I remember, because I read that back in school. This is much more difficult to read. It's much more dense of a prose, but it's absolutely fantastic. I loved it. So it's basically about this Dean Jocelyn, who decides to construct a spire within his cathedral, and he has this image sent from God that tells him he needs to build this spire. But the thing is that the spire is literally impossible to build. Builders told him, if you build this, it will fall. It's going to collapse. There's no the foundation is bad. Your cathedral is the cathedral itself is gonna crumble eventually, and if you build the spire, it's just all gonna go crumbling down. But the dean is insistent that he was sent by God to create and build the spire. So this whole book is about his sort of collapse. That's the theme of this book, collapse. This collapse of his mental stability as he tries to prevent the collapse of this desired spire. And within it, there's this obsession. So yeah, collapse and obsession are the themes of the book, but also this obsession with this woman who's sort of going through the cathedral, and sort of the relationships she has with other men, and sort of how that also brings a certain the downfall of certain people in the book. And this was fascinating. It was intense, especially, I mean, the description of the spire, just to begin. I mean, the description of the spire is just amazing. Just the ability to describe this architecture and this obsession, and the characters are just very, very good. And especially when you get to the end and you get to the final reveal at the end, where it's just like, oh, okay then, wow, yeah, that's really, really awful. So yeah, this was beautiful. This was absolutely wonderful. Like I said, super gothic, very, very dark. Basically a book about madness, and gosh, this was good. Very, very good. So then, I don't remember which one of these I read first, but we're going to go with the more interesting of the two, and that is Ryu Murakami's The Other Murakami, The Better Murakami. Excuse me, Haruki. I don't like Murakami Haruki that much. This is The Better Murakami, Ryu Murakami. And this is In the Miso Soup. So In the Miso Soup is technically, because you can read this on the surface level as just this, but technically it's a thriller. So basically, this Japanese woman has been brutally murdered and dismembered within the Kabukicho district of Shinjuku in Tokyo. So Kabukicho is the sex district of Tokyo. So there's all these like host bars, hostess bars, sex bars, like orgy bars, and it's basically, it is, but it especially was a very seedy area. So basically, this book was published in 1996. Kabukicho has been cleaned up since then. It's still a sex district. All those type of clubs happen, but it's much, because Tokyo has been in preparation for the Olympics and just to sort of more modernize itself. It has always made an effort to clean up this area to make it less dangerous and more tourist friendly. But this is 1996, before all that happened. So basically, this woman was killed and dismembered. And people are like, oh my goodness, who would do that? I mean, that's a Japanese person would never do that. And so there's, what's his name? Ken, I think? Kenji, sorry. Kenji is sort of a tour guide of the area. And he gets a request by this man, American Frank, to guide him around Kabukicho. And so basically, this is sex tourism. So Kenji's being paid to sort of help Frank get laid, to experience the sexual clubs in Kabukicho. And so Kenji meets this Frank character, and Frank, from the very, very beginning, it doesn't seem like he's telling the truth. Like his story about where he's from, why he came to Japan, and things like that is very contradictory. Like he contradicts himself, and the facts don't seem to be aligning well, and like the timetable he gives doesn't seem to align very well. So Kenji's like, he's like, why is he lying? Who is this person? And Kenji starts to think that Frank might be this person, might have killed this woman. But he still takes him on because that's, preposterous, right? So he still takes on this man, Frank. He takes on the assignment, and they do go to Kabukicho, and he helps him go to all these sex devoted businesses. And just seeing Frank's behavior and sort of his interaction with people really, really just rubs Kenji the wrong way. He's like, this guy's weird. There's something wrong with this guy. And so the thriller aspect is sort of like, this Frank person, did he or didn't he? Is he the killer of that woman? And so when you mix that with the seediness of the red light district at Kabukicho, it's very, very intense and very creepy. And so just with that, you can read this as a thriller. But if you're more familiar with Kabukicho and Japan in the 1996, there's also the underlying aspect of sort of Japan versus foreigners, especially, Americans. And sort of like, is it okay to judge, as a Japanese, is it okay to judge an American via their stereotypes, particularly in a character like Frank, who actually does fulfill those stereotypes? So then you remember that this is also published in 1996, where back then, tourism wasn't, what it is now with Instagram and all those things. Like, Japan wasn't cleaned up back then. It wasn't super friendly to foreigners. Now you go to Japan, and Japan has made a real effort to publish, to have signs in English and to make it really easier for foreigners to be in the country. But 1996, that was not the case. There was a lot of pushback from Japanese people against foreigners. Like, they shouldn't be. Why are they in our country? What are they doing here? Especially for sex tourism. Like, do we really want these strange, like, white men having sex with our women? Like, was basically sort of that aspect. So there's definitely that sort of level of reading you can have behind this very, very dark thriller. So there's the two levels of reading which made this reading very exciting to read. I mean, I read this in one sitting. I sat down on the sofa and then read it. 2 hours later, I was done. Like, that's how gripping it was. It's dark. There are murder scenes in here. This will not be for everybody, but I really like this. I thought it was very interesting. And it's when I say I like this, it's almost like I like this but disliked it because it was so dark and grim, and there's a lot of questionable scenes. But yeah, this was good. I liked it. And I like Ryu Murakami. He's the better Murakami. I mean, Haruki Murakami, I'm sorry to say it, he writes the same novel every single time. And there's no plot. Nothing happens. There's no underlying theme. It's just okay. But Ryu Murakami writes a different book every single time, and it's always good. So read that one. I'm pointing to the book. Read that author. Don't read Haruki. The last book was just a standard thriller. This has been on my TBR pile for like over 10 years. I got this book a long time ago. It's The Tattoo Murder Case by Akimitsu Takagi. It's a standard, detective thriller book. This woman with this very famous tattoo on her back has been murdered, and she's been stripped of the tattoo. And it's just a book about who did it, who could do that, why was she murdered, why was the tattoo stolen. And it sort of goes into the underbelly of the tattoo society in Japan. And I mean, it's an interesting book because that is the tattoo, especially in this era, because this is back in like 1920s or so, like probably Tokyo in the 1920s. Tattoo, it's even now, it's looked down upon in Japan. So this was definitely a society that did not that belong to the underbelly of Japan. So when you looked at it this way, this book is interesting. And for me, it was very good, interesting in the fact that it looked at 1920s Tokyo and it looked at areas I'm very familiar with. Like, I used to work in one of the areas that's discussed in this book. But in terms of, is it thrilling? Is it suspenseful? I mean, this is an old book. It was published in 1948. So I mean, it's an old style. It's fun. It was fun. It was interesting. I'm glad I read it, but it's not gonna be memorable. It's not gonna have super crazy plots and twists. Like, you know who did it and you know why. So there's nothing too surprising about the book. So it's not something I would particularly recommend, but you know, maybe you could be interested. I don't know. I didn't really sell that very well, but I mean, but I can't, because it didn't really leave me with any particularly affection or feeling towards it. It was just like, okay, it was fun, it was interesting. I got some good, there's certain aspects of it that I got out of it that were nice. But at the end of the day, it's just, if you, maybe especially if you read like more modern thrillers, like this is gonna seem generic to you. I think it's gonna seem very old-fashioned, and I think that's where we can leave that. So that's it. That finishes part 2 of this video of all the books that I've read in 2020 before starting my booktube channel. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of what my reading is like. And yeah, I'll see you in my next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.